think you all know my name is Steve Denver. So I'm the department head here at IB. And this is, so there was a full introduction yesterday by Virginia for Francis' research seminar, so I won't repeat that history. But I'll share a little, this is an opportunity case for a position change for Francis in the department. And what's something that accompanies that position change that's being considered is certainly the much bigger emphasis on teaching, advising, and mentoring. And so we asked Francis to share his experiences, and sort of philosophy and thoughts on teaching and advising. And that's what he's here to share with us today. I'll also note, you know, there's we've had some COVID in it among our community. I think that's some of the reasons we're seeing less participation or more Zoom participation. So we'll certainly engage the Zoom communities. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank.
Thanks so much, Steve. Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you all. Actually, I as part of my job as director of SIMRS, I've been involved in a couple searches recently. There's 2 joint positions in OSU, so I've seen a lot of teaching talks. And one thing that really impressed me, well, a couple things impressed me. One was that most, if not all, they talked about their motivation, and it was really useful for me to see how people saw themselves in terms of where did they come from. You know, what's their touchstone that they go back to make sure that they're pointing in the right direction when it comes to teaching. And I would do that too. And I'll say that, you know, motivation is really personal. You know, why we teach, that's something that is deep within all of us in different ways. And I'll share that I'm motivated by 2 things. One is really the understanding and the experience that college education is a privilege. It's an absolute privilege, not a privilege in our society. I say this because, you know, this is where I started from. So I was on the web a couple years ago looking at old photographs of New York when I was young, and I came across this one in the New York Times. And this is a sweatshop, a garment factory on the Lower East Side. And, you know, I stared at it, wow, that looks really familiar. And I realized, and I found the address, it's the garment factory that my parents worked in. So I would go there after school, and they had to work at nights too. And I remember the floorboards actually, the unevenness. So I was a kid that started off in American education system, you know, being in a place like this. So I really had no right expectation that I would actually get to have a college education. You know, you notice that the windows are all boarded up because when you worked at night, it was against union rules, and the union and INS, Immigration Nationalization, they would come and raid the factories downtown for illegal immigrants, which we were in the business season, we did not have work visas, so we were always scared that we would get raided, and that's the pressure. But I'm also what also struck me is that a couple of years ago at Roy Alteen at a State of the College meeting, he actually said, well, and I might not have to remember wrong, but it made an impression. Said it takes 40 students to support one faculty. Okay, Bob, you probably know the number better than I do. It's like, wow, 40 families are going, most of them are probably going to debt. Middle-class families going to send their kids to OSU to support one of us. That's an incredible responsibility that we have. The second motivation, and this is going to be, I'll just say, you know, I'm still of the generation where I think that I equate racism with ignorance. I think about how about 4.5 decades separate the Loving decision and legalized gay marriage. So the Loving decision allowed interracial marriage that allows my right to be married. That's one side. But it only took 1 year to go from Obama to Charlottesville. And of course, now we've normalized racial violence in America. And I think about just a couple weeks ago, I was driving it to work, and there's a pickup truck, a couple white guys behind me, and they're tailgating me, they're honking at me, flipping me off. It's like, what can I do to not have other people like me experience that stress, because this is pervasive in our society. What can I do to reduce level of ignorance? You know, Bruce and I, we've talked about this a lot. And the other thing, of course, I heard was teaching philosophy. And I'll just say that, you know, I don't have a philosophy with capital P. I'm too new at this. So I don't think that I can honestly, well, I have this kind of philosophy that's built up interest. But I will say that, you know, my point of departure is really, when we look at it across the room, we think about students' ecology, I'm really struck by the fact that most of these students will not go on to career in ecology. You know, maybe some, you know, those, the ones that are really enthusiastic on that one, maybe they will go on to career in ecology. But most of these students, when they come to college level ecology course, they're not going to go to career. One, make sure that the students that are going to go on have the best preparation for the career thing. But two is like, what do you do about all the other students? You know, how can we best use the time that we have with them? And it's, you know, it's a really limited time. And I'm actually, as an ecologist, this is my very local bias. I think that we actually have an incredible opportunity for advancing undergraduate teaching. In that, you know, ecology is, it's not like physical sciences where, you know, day one, you know, you're going to learn to find out the foundations of laws of physics. And if you miss day one, if you miss day three, you're kind of posed. Ecology, it's really, we don't have laws. It's a pretty lawless field, right? You know, every once in a while, a sheriff will come to town and try to, you know, instill some laws, you know, but we don't have a lot of Denzel Washingtons coming out of the field much. So, but what that means is that ecology offers students an angle approach to a field from different lanes. It's okay if they didn't get thermodynamics the first day, but there are other, you know, physics class, but there are other ways to get into ecology. And most importantly, and this is what I believe, ecology is, yeah, it's a system of knowledge, but it's really a system of inquiry. And I can't imagine that we want students 20 years from now to remember some specific fact about ecology that we need today. Because, you know, one, that fact is probably obsolete. And two, that doesn't give them the skill to tap into the power of ecological thinking to address questions that they might have to attack complex challenges. Right? So I think we have incredible opportunities as ecologists to teach the critical thinking skills and the creative problem solving that we all value. I remember when we did the curriculum review, you know, when we did the workshop, that was number one, right? Critical thinking, and not just knowledge content. So what are the outcomes? And I know this is, you know, I should have, you know, active, evaluatable verbs, and I think, you know, we should have Bloom's taxonomy here, but just we're amongst friends. So this is what I think our outcomes should be, at least my outcomes should be. One is that sense of belonging, that students actually see themselves in science. And, you know, and that's hard. That's the first step. And I really want to empower them to think critically, not just to say you should think critically, but, you know, how do we give them the tools so that they have those conceptual tools so that they can apply ecological thinking to new problems that they come up against, and not be stymied and not feel like, well, experts will tell me, I don't know, that they don't have the ability to value. And I really want them to have a worldview that's expanded by science. I mean, we enjoy this because we think that worldview makes us makes our lives richer. And I, of course, want to make sure that people, you know, we think science is also a gateway to the middle class. You know, kids should have that opportunity. Those are the outcomes that I envision. And I'll talk about what's my approach to teaching. And I'll say that right now I have three approaches. One is, you know, how I was taught. Two is my experiences in science communication, and three is my experience in organizing scientists around goal-oriented conversations. And I went to a small liberal arts college in New Hampshire. This was my ecology professor. And red flags should be growing up, right? Teach how you were taught. That is the worst thing you can say to someone right now. Because we were taught in a way that probably was not modern and pedagogical approaches. And oh my God, is he gonna wax poetically about the great college professor he has never had? I will, because this college that I went to, I didn't really realize at the time, but we had very few lecture courses, and actually I look back at we never had those traditional lecture courses, and we had flipped classrooms, so we actually read papers, and most of the class was about discussion. The first science paper I read was an original paper in science, so we were engaged in the primary literature. Two, it was active learning process, so it's about debating, forming groups, having peers comment on your work, and it was absolutely inquiry-based training because we're trying to not reproduce the lab, reproduce the knowledge, and say, well, given what we know now, how would we, what's the question? What's a smart question? And how do we get that answer? And so I will draw on this because this is really familiar. This is exactly how I was taught. And this turns out this is, I think, in line with some of the practices that we want to replicate. And Charlene, my professor, she won the Nobel Award for excellence in college education. And she's actually a researcher in ecological pedagogy. I didn't know at that time, but she was experimenting on us, her students, to develop this body of work that's now from how we teach ecology. So I feel very fortunate that I had that experience. And maybe those red flags are down a little bit. Second is that I was a terrible science communicator when I first came. I just thought that I needed to explain everything at once. And if I didn't give them everything at once, then I failed. I'm surprised I got asked back in guest lectures, of course, to be honest. But I had the fortune of being engaged with Compass, and I think a lot of you know this because Compass started within IB, then Zoology. Now it's a national organization, and they're I think the premier science communication organization. And throughout my career, I was first, and then for many times, a trainee. So I did a lot of Compass trainings for different aspects of science. And now I've actually moved on to I'm actually a trainer, and I'm actually helping think about organizing teams. And what's science communication good for? Well, you don't want to lose people. And what I learned, things like know your audience. What is it that they want out of this conversation? Because I'm gonna have my agenda, but unless I can understand where they're coming from, what they want, I'm not that's true. The other is that kind of feedback when you're losing someone. Oh my God, it's just that split second. Their eyes are going. Like you tell that you lost, and you want to track back, and then you want to engage. Well, what did you hear from me? What is it that you're finding most useful? And it's really trying to get to the essence of the message. And I'm going to give you an example of where it worked. So I was talking with Congressman Bonamici on a visit to African Science Center, and just early this year, this
is a term for carbon sequestration that happens along a seashore for mangroves or tidal marshes or seagrass meadows. How significant could these zones be in terms of carbon sequestration?
Very significant. And I'll tell you, I first got interested in this, was probably about 4 years ago when I was working on a book on ocean acidification. I was over at the Hatfield Marine Science Center talking with some Oregon State University researchers who were studying how seagrasses, as you mentioned, seagrasses, mangroves, calcareous, can actually help mitigate ocean acidification. And at the time, this research was in its infancy, but I recognize this tremendous potential.
And that research I was talking about,
This is a term for carbon
So I was describing work that my student, the student that Zach Hack and I was advising Caitlin on sea grasses and coastal vegetation, and noticed that she caught that the research was not ready. So I didn't say that this was the silver bullet, but I walked her through the process, and she got it. So she said, okay, then we need to invest in science. So she introduced the bill in Congress to do just that. So this is that satisfaction. I got the message right. My audience took the right piece of information. But the other approach is, scientists, it's really, I guess the question is, would we prefer to teach a room full of scientists, or would we prefer to teach a room full of second-year college students? I'm not sure which answer I would have, right? Because colleagues, scientists, they are cats, right? And it's really hard to get them to a shared vision, a shared work plan, and actually have them execute work plan and then deliver on that. And one of the things that I've done more and more in my career is to be that person that organizes scientists. For example, I've been co-chair of a lot of working groups. I take really smart, good people, put them together, think about how I'm going to organize them, think about how we can have common interests and what we'll do. And we produce things like these white papers, but white papers sound boring, but usually they're lined up with a position making off duty. And these white papers allow us to influence legislation. So these 4 pieces of legislation that were passed is directly as a result of the work that we did together of being able to organize scientists to coalesce scientific advice. So there's 2 pieces of legislation in Oregon and 2 in California. Okay, so I guess this is my, at the core, this is what I believe. It's a bit of a fake too, is that one is teaching is a science. So there's actually another approach to this, just as communication is a science. And that good teaching is a learnable skill. I believe that to be true, and I hope that I am someone that can learn it. Never phone it in. The times that you will fall flat on your face. I've done that, and so never do that. And then it gets better practice. It's something that the more you're engaged in, the more I'm engaged, the better I can get. So that I can deliver on that promise of delivering education to people that work really hard to get. Okay, I'm teaching a course over in honors colleges in Colloquia, and I thought I would run you through at least kind of the day one, at least part of day one, to give you a sense like what is it that how is he in the classroom setting? And the class that I'm teaching is Science and Solutions for Hot, Sour, and Breathless Ocean. And what we did when we came to class is actually there's 12 students, so small, and we went around the room and I asked them, of course, their name, but what is it that they want to get out of class? So I wanted to hear from them on day one, what their expectations are and what they want to get out of it. And then I wanted to give them a way to orient their minds. Oh, this is what the experience of this expectations. In part because we're on an accelerated schedule. We're going on a field course this weekend, so I needed to give them enough basics so that we can do the work together. And this is a short lecture. Is it really? Is the ocean changing? And how do we know? And I ran through this exercise. I wanted to engage people right away. And you guys got to be participants. It's going to feel weird. Okay? So, and I said, okay, hands, like 10 is like, yeah, it's a solid yeah, heck yeah. And 0 is like, I have no idea. So is sound science possible? Like, you guys got to do this. Hands up. Yeah, I mean, we can agree like that, right? That's an easy one. How about, is it important to have good science informing climate environment possible? Some people might say, it's actually you want good social science. I mean, there are other things that might factor into good policy. Do you feel like you have a pretty good understanding of climate change science? Yeah, I think do better. Do you feel like you can find information? If you don't, if you have gaps, do you feel like you can find information? Yeah. Do you feel like you can discern between good information and bad information? Yeah. And this is an example. This looks like a scientific paper. That guy has an ID. The hoax of ocean acidification. This one is Scientific American. Turns out this is by Scott Doney, who's one of the preeminent Earth system scientists in the country. Do you feel like you can interpret scientific information? Do you feel like you can communicate the evidence for climate change? How about the ocean? So I started seeing a lot of just single hands by this time. You feel like you have the knowledge necessary to counter climate change skeptics. So when our president says that global warming is a Chinese hoax, do you feel like you have the information at your disposal to counter that? So this was, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was engaged, because I wanted to hear and find out what their level of comfort is, but also kind of walk them through. This is why we're going to do this, because we want to get to some point. And I asked, like, how comfortable are you taking my word for it? But I was in the lab coat. The lab coat helped just fight my favorite. And I give an example. I asked him, why are we talking about hot, sour, breathless ocean? Isn't climate change all about sea level rise? Because we see this in the news, because we just saw what happened with Hurricane Ida. And this is a picture of Manhattan with a 2.4 meter sea level rise. Like, we should be putting all of our collective scientific energy into solving that crisis. I was like, well, when did we see a 2.4 meter sea level rise? And this is IPCC, so I was able to tell them, well, this is one source of information. And it's out to 2100. Who cares? That's like, I'm 6 feet under by that. The students be 6 feet under by that. So, but I noted, well, it's not, even though it's a slow marginal change, but there are some surprises. This was New York City subway flooding. So there's some extreme events. How will we? Why would this matter? And I just introduced the idea that, well, we can think about a mean, that there's a mean temperature and mean sea level, but when you shift the mean, kind of wacky things happen, right? You change the frequency of rare events, but you also change that tail, those extreme events. So I did this as a way to give them a tool to how would you answer the question, like, what's the big deal? 2100 at the earliest. We've only had a problem. So I then walked into the hot, sour, and breathless, and I won't even do hot today, you all. I said, well, what kind of temperature rise are we talking about? I said, well, this is temperature from, this is the best record we have. And, you look at the range, it's about a degree, 1 degree difference. I said, hey, this room, do you think it's 21 degrees or 22 degrees? You can't tell. We can't tell. Why would we care about 1 degree difference? And maybe the skeptics are correct. So this is, you can find stuff like this all the time. I said, can we science this? We science this problem. Because someone said, you guys are making a lot of hot air out of 1 degree warming in the ocean. Isn't that great? Or can you feel it? I said, well, how would we counter this argument? Can we science this? And I said, I am not going to give it to you. I want you to explore. And so we went around the room. It's kind of like that awkward wait where someone's gonna break the ice and say something. I'm not going to give you this. I want you guys to just throw things out. And they did. And it was really, well, how would you counter that? If it was just 1 degree. Who cares?
Well, if you look at the bottom margin compared to the of the most recent measurements. It's much higher than the mean and the top of the other.
So maybe the average temperature in the long run is minor, but then the trend is big. Okay. So we went through this exercise and they came up with actually 7 different reasons. And I'll tell you that I had, I showed them one, right? And actually this wasn't the first one that they talked about. I thought, well, remember the mean change one? What I was really interesting was that I had a couple students tell me, actually they gave me 2 at once. And I okay, you're actually 2, and I give some context. And then some other students would actually repeat basically a variation of that. So and actually the guys would repeat what the women had said. I was like, okay, that's the same thing as what she said, right? It's you're adding on it. So it was actually important to recognize who had information, not have someone. Oh, I just came up with this. So it's just kind of that equity in class. So I gave the need, and they also, oh yeah, maybe the heating's not uniform. That some places are actually a lot hotter than others. And they actually gave me that. They were really excited just in the biology part. It's like, well, maybe 1 degree does matter in biology. And I showed this thermal performance curve for salmon. It's like, yeah, things are fine, and then it drops off a cliff. And to give them a sense of like temperature, it's like, now this is immersion cooked egg. This is 5 degrees. So, would you eat that? No, I wouldn't eat that. But at 40 degrees, like, I mean, actually, in Celsius, it's less than I could eat that. That could be delicious on toast. So just give a sense of, that's 1 degree of biology. And then we also have well, maybe the changes are actually much faster, or that we haven't seen the scale of this change in recent history. So there's some data behind that. But what they gave me was irreversibility. That maybe it's 1 degree, but that the worst is yet to come. They also talk about, well, maybe there are feedbacks that you cross a threshold and things will feed forward. And they also talk about kind of from a societal perspective, what's the opportunity cost? If we could do something now that's cheaper, why wait till it's 10 degrees when it's really expensive? So I was super excited that they were engaged and they came up with really good answers. So what's the rest of the class like? So we have actually just this week they were in my lab and we tinkered with ocean science, ocean acidification and epoxy measurements. I was trying to say, why did I want to teach this class? I actually feel like because climate change science is probably the worst vehicle for teaching critical thinking. You think climate change science? Well, there's the IPCC. There are really smart people doing this. They know what is up. We're not. It's a mountain of established facts to climb. For a student to engage in climate change science, like, I need to get that PhD. I need to get on the IPCC. So it's really the opposite of what we want. But what I realized that we can demystify climate science and we can democratize science because we're going to use climate grade instruments and we'll make our own measurements in the coastal ocean. So we had a lab, a little background reading, so out of classwork, and we're going to the coast. We're going to ready pH, oxygen, salinity, temperature sensors. I'm going to hang in a dock. I'm going to show them around the Oregon coast. So I want to make sure it's place case. This is why. This is the zone. This is the area of climate change that we're most focused in. It's a little crazy, but we're asking you to be honest, but I'm in it. And then we do things like discussion. And there's 2 papers that I wanted to read. One's by Carlos Duarte and others about really. It's basically we're kind of making a lot of stuff up about the state of the ocean, and it's not rigorous, not scientific. And there's a counter argument, and Carlos Duarte, for those of you not in it. So he's an eminent scientist. His H score is 150. this is somebody that's doubled that extra. That's the most successful acclaimed scientist that we have in the department. So, and he's no, mow and, slouch, crazy older, like that. But what I want to do is like have them engaged in this, the scientific dialogue process. And the scientists actually, how would they write a letter to the editor to, given the science that we're going to learn on the state of science in support or against the Barclays argument. We're going to do some hands-on stuff because we're going to have data. Because I'll go back out 2 weeks, a week, 10 days to get the sensors back. So we'll download data. Let's see what we found. We're going to see what worked with it, and we're going to do a reading, connecting some of the values that we see to biology. And this is also a primer of how you read a science paper. And then we're going to actually have them plot the data. How would they show data? What is it that they can draw? And I'll give them some other sources. And there's some element of group work because I want them to actually see how we should write that letter and comment on it. So that, sometimes it's hard to see this, right? But they're good at editing. Like, oh, I don't like that. So that it's a way of learning. I'm kind of like that. So they can say, well, what worked about this argument? Something really when it's missing, how would you improve that? And we're going to move into the solution space. There's literature on what are the kinds of solutions that are being proposed to counter, mitigate, or adapt to climate change. And when you think about teaching kids critical thinking skills, it's also that problem-solving skills. It's actually different, and it asks us to be creative in some ways, but also there's a system, right? What's the question? What is the level of the problem you're trying to address, and how do you evaluate that to be a good solution or not? And I want this to be a real experience because one, the data we're going to submit to the Oregon Department of Ecology. They've asked me for data on the Bay portion of the HDA because they need data because they're doing an assessment of water quality for clean water acts really this process. They want data. I was like, okay, here's a group that wants data, and we're going to provide it. Because there's nobody that's actually measuring oxygen and carbon emission right now, even though we're going to the home of our premier science lab, right? And then I wanted to propose candidate solutions, and I'm going to invite, hopefully I can get Senator Rowland, who was one of the authors of the bill, he's retired from the Senate now, to come and be part of that policymaker panel so that the students can hear from them about the role of science, and also propose, just share some ideas so that it's we're not playing, well, we're actually trying to offer people to make decisions some options. Okay, so I know that in this new position, teaching ecology is very fun. I didn't dive into why would I reconsider the ecology course. I will, and I can say to that. But and I hope that undergraduate course gives you a sense of what kind. Even though it's boutique, right? It's 12 students. I get to have that high level engagement. But I hope it gives you a sense of at least what are the approach that I will try to use to engage students as effectively as possible. So when I think about graduate teaching, I think about the college's toolbox. And there, I think it's on my slide. And you might think, oh, ecosystem biogeochemist, for him, the college's toolbox is going to be, some fancy sensor. She's going to help students build sensor, and I do. They can play, or it might be about lab techniques. And that's the college's toolbox. It's like it's an aspect. It's a new acquisition. Yes and no, actually. That's not where my brain goes when I say what's the college's toolbox. And I think really it's about those conceptual wrenches, spanners that we use to attack problems. That's the key, right? Tools that I want to provide students. And I would try to do that in a class like ecosystem ecology, for example. And I would have it where it's a comparative perspective between aquatic and terrestrial ecosystem. And because I want to teach to every student in our department. So it is there's a lot of benefit to thinking about comparative. Well, why is it different? Why would you expect it to be different in a terrestrial system and a aquatic system? Is there an expectation? Why would you say that? And I would cover some topics, but behind each topic is really some angle approach that I want to discuss about. For example, ecosystem ecology, glorified accounting of the concept of science. I want to question everything. That's fundamental science. Nutrient limitation, input-driven, loss-driven process, and shitty care. It's really about open and closed system dynamics, loose versus tight feedbacks that really transcends ecosystems. Primary production, emerging or species level property, and then it forces us to think about, well, what are cross-scale interactions? And are they important? Why aren't trophic cascades all wet? Is it about the system, or is it about the players in the system that structures the dynamics of communities? Biodiversity dysfunction. Until we succeed in wrestling competition, because I think that my advice, I think that was his master plan all along. When he introduced this concept of biodiversity dysfunction, that's launched probably 50 science nature papers in the last 20 years. I think that he was playing a long game. He wanted to rescue competition process. But it's a really great example when you look at the literature to think about steady state versus transient dynamics, because your expectations about ecosystem function change radically depending if you think about it in the steady state sense or transient sense. Seascape and landscape, what does space give us? And this is, ecosystem ecology, even though I'm on the editorial board of biogeochemistry, we often think that ecosystem ecology is biogeochemistry. It's not. It's actually about things like the spatial configuration of ecosystems. So the seascape and landscape, and we can think about mean versus frequency. If you put everything in one place versus distributing populations or materials, with some spatial pattern, does that change system dynamics? And I would have a focus on ecosystem ecology and evolution, in-laws and outlaws. What's the skill there? It's just grit. Sometimes you do have to go ask that question. You have to go there. And of course, ecosystem ecology and evolution. We've been on and off, often poor bedfellows. There's just been a lot of conflict. Started at the root of ecosystem ecology, where people thought, we would advocate through selection because that's how systems evolve. Some pretty crazy stuff that somehow continues to stay. What are the outcomes? Well, competency. I want our students to not be strangers to ecosystem ecology and can place their own research. I don't expect aha, I am going to convert. This is the church of ecosystem ecology. I'm going to convert you all to ecosystem ecology. No, I want them to place their own research, whether it's at the cellular, organismal, community, population level. I want them to place their work within an ecosystem context. At least be able to. And it's really the science. So when I talk about the ecologist toolbox, this is what I mean, is that they have these conceptual tools and they're able to apply these different kinds of mental models to, they can have different angles of attack for research questions, challenges that they have in the future. What else would I teach? Well, I think about global change ecology. Certainly something that a lot of students coming into the department thinking about. They're not here just to, well, some are, they're going to advance science, but some want to advance science and advance our ability to attack the climate crisis. And, I would have a course where we would have topics like the evidence for climate change. And it's really teaching students about multiple lines of evidence for hypothesis testing, testing climate change alternative. It's about a hypothesis, but it's also about that skill of out thinking of something. maybe I'm an inherently lazy ecologist, but if I have a problem, I'll instead of like, okay, I need to go make all those measurements, like, can we help think this? You know, someone just proposed something. Is there a logical way to outthink it so that we didn't have to go make those measurements to test that person's hypothesis? I mean, talk about observations, both modern and paleo. So it's about inferences and extrapolation of causality. You know, how do we know that climate change isn't the warming that we're experiencing, just not the rebound that we're just in the peak of the interglacial cycle? Models, I wanted to understand where our understanding of climate change comes from, particularly as we move in the future. And it will be about evolution from the you know, kind of the day one general circulation models to, you know, and then they added biology because they put a giant leaf in the continent. Turns out that wasn't right. To now we have Earth system models that integrate ecosystem ecology, but then there are other models that are also integrating social science dynamics. So thinking about a couple of human natural systems. So it's a field that we should all be familiar with. And then I want to talk about experiments, both the assay scale strength and whole system. And this is a way to think, to really think hard about scale dependence and cross scale interactions. And I would absolutely want them to think about ecological theory of climate change. You know, can we do well in climate science? We not have ecological theory form advances. For example, you know, species distribution models. It's you know, it's based on what we see today, but they're largely ecology free. So can we project the future of future biogeography without being informed by ecological interactions? And I want to have a reflective opportunity where we talk about what limits and targets of global change science. And it's something that I think a lot. I'm in meetings a lot. We talk about it's like, why aren't we making the kinds of advances that we need at the rate that we need? What's limiting us? Of course, we want to turn our attention to climate adaptation and climate mitigation. What are the solutions out there? And one, I think this is a really important thing that I know it's not a typical science subject, but it's a science of climate justice. If it was me, I'd just have climate justice, but it is a science class. But there's actually new bodies of work that's doing attribution from a geopolitical perspective, but there's also understanding exposure risk for different communities. So I think climate change is too big of a science for us to not connect it with climate justice. So what are some outcomes? You know, competency. You know, I want our students to be informed consumer and critics of climate change science. You know, I've seen a lot of students come through where they just took someone's word for it. I said, well, you know, that's actually, that prediction is actually very tenuous. The field is, the rest of the climate field don't think that that's actually the expected direction of change. I want them to not, you know, grab the first way to read and think, okay, this is the state of the field. They're not going to do climate science, but I want them to be informed about what's good science right now. I want to inspire transdisciplinary confidence so that we talk a lot about team science and we talk about transdisciplinarity because you know, I think it's harder to get big science done alone. I mean, that's just a fact. So we need students that already have that capacity to reach out and also to tackle. I mean, the transverse problems. I think are the problems that you can't attack. You can't solve for your own discipline. We have that skill, and of course, it's more skills and more tools in a toolbox. You know, I don't want to just walk away like, oh, now I know how to make a fourth decimal pH measurement. That's fine, but I want to have that conceptual wrench, that multi-tool that carries them forward. And I'll close by saying that I think, you know, I want to teach because I also want to help us change the future of the field. We absolutely need to change who is engaged in the process of science. And the way I think about it is that it's about justice, but it's also about our credibility. I don't think we can say that, yes, this is the best science out there when we've excluded the vast majority of people from participating in science. Are you telling me that these are the brightest minds in the country? Like, no, we miss a lot of people. So I think more and more we can't get away with saying that this is the best that we have to offer. But we obviously can exclude people. And we need opportunities. I need to. I want to resist. I want to translate commitment into action. And I take opportunities wherever I get it. A couple years ago, there was an opportunity to go after funding for ship dates. So Oceania's costs $30,000 a day. That's not my course budget. But there's an opportunity, and we got 8 days of ship time, and we were able to take undergraduates out. That was the mission. It was for at-sea training, and it wasn't like, okay, you guys come on board and watch us work. It was full-on training. I wanted to give them experience of what being a marine scientist was. So we had students. She's connecting to a rosette that's sampling 1,000 meters below, and she's telling the crane operator, stop right there. I got to fire the bottom. And they're recovering the package. They get into it. They're doing chemistry for example. That student, that lever, she's working a 6-ton frame. So that's the kind of experience that, man, you want to be able to do that when we can. And we're doing the way that I think about it is that we often think about, we want to advance DEI, but as long as it's about $500. Everything in OSU seems like it's a $5 problem that we can solve. We don't go after the challenges that cost more money because we don't have it. Well, why don't we go get it? If you have a good idea on what to do, let's find people who support it. So I'm not going to be able to get $30,000, but I can get already $3,000 or $5,000, right? To have the locker so we can take students out. And what I want to do is not have someone at the end of their career, kind of this capstone space. I want students from the Connect program or other programs, first term. I want them to go out and see, so that they have a sense of belonging in our science. And I already engaged with a number of IB colleagues who will help me. I talked to Ocean Foundation, and I think this is up now. So this is part of their fundraising campaign. And obviously, what gives me joy in doing this? Of course, it's your students being successful, right? Linus just defended, and he has a career position with the Ocean Fisheries Initiative. Kayla Boggle, when she's not, in PBS NewsHour, she has a fantastic position at UW, the Career Sound Institute. Hannah, a master's student, came, she wanted to have a career in biology, but she couldn't find the opportunity. She had the background to get into a PhD program, so she can't leave. And now she's working at the Institute of Ocean Sciences, science. These are 2 students that I had as part of before River Deck was the faculty student mentor program. She's in public health now. Alexa, she's actually started a PhD program with Loeb in micro. And I've done that program 2 years ago. I had like 40 cups of coffee undergrad. It's an amazing experience. They tell you about what works in advising, what doesn't. But it's about that giving back. I get to give back. We were at the end of our year, and I said, let's do something different. Because we usually go for coffee, and we go to a different coffee spot on campus each meeting. Let's go gather together at a bar. And I knew these kids, this is not experience that they had. This is the most Oregon thing they've ever experienced. Here's a farm, and they could. So just that paying it back to students opportunities that we were afforded ourselves. That's what I hope to do better. And I'll end there.
you very much, Francis. We have some time for some questions about Francis's presentation. Teresa, I'll ask you to help me please with Zoom questions.
Of course.
Start in the room. I think that's B and D.
That's me, yeah. I'm curious, Francis, from my own experience, especially when I teach a back workforce, the biodiversity class, I would say at least a quarter of my students are pretty strong climate change skeptics coming into the class. And I'm curious whether you have a sense for the different students that you teach, if there's a lot of skeptics there, and what things have you found to be more effective at engaging with them and getting them to possibly accept some of the science?
Andy, I wish I could give you an informed answer. We've had 2 classes, and I haven't
Oh,
taught.
I'm sorry, you haven't taught ecology?
No.
Oh, okay, okay.
So and this is why the opportunity.
Right.
But so in Cornell, when I was a student there, they did a poll for evolution. So this, like, do you believe in evolution? So invariably, the percentage of students who don't believe in evolution rose at the end of the course. And when I think about climate skeptics, that to me is like, yeah, that's our audience. We want them. They might still be skeptics when they come out of class, but at least they have the skills to make that decision. And that would be my goal.
All right, I'll ask one. I liked your picture of Denzel and friends earlier on. And I'm sort of treating this notion of multiple ways to come at ecology. I'm curious what your perspective is on traditional ecological knowledge and the place of that today in undergraduate ecology.
Yeah, I didn't used to think about that at all. It's outside my lanes. But as part of my job at Simmers, I've partnered with the New Beginnings Travel Student Program on campus, and I partnered because they offer mentorship training. It's not just about internship, it's about mentor training. And they needed funds to bring a mentor in to teach how to be good mentors to students. And I was figure out, and we sponsored that. And I said, I finally got it. And what I got was that I related back to my, and this is not going to answer your question, I'll just do it myself. Because growing up, you either went to the Western doctor or the Chinese doctor. And I didn't quite realize how assault on a system of thinking, a culture was to say, well, the Western is the right one. Because I knew from my family that, look, there's this huge tradition in Eastern medicine that is so easy to discount it. So I that to me, Chris, like, there is an absolutely an alternative way of understanding that knowledge perspective. I didn't teach that necessarily, but I think I can help people understand that just because we're teaching modern science doesn't mean that that's the only mode of knowledge. But I haven't answered your question.
That's great. I'm seeing a student pile up outside. We got a our next speaker here. So I'm going to say thank you once again, Francis. There's an opportunity to interact more with Francis at multiple points along the way here. So, that's your statement.